In this lesson, we're going to be looking at an extremely important concept in Spanish and talking about how verbs work. This is extremely important because every sentence in any language has a verb. And verbs in Spanish work significantly different than English verbs do. What we have to talk about is the idea of conjugating a verb. This idea is so vitally important that you must know this in order to successfully complete Spanish 1. Because it's something you'll be doing as long as you're working with Spanish, because every verb, as we said, every sentence rather, has a verb in it. So we're going to be talking about conjugating AR verbs in Spanish. We're going to talk about what it means to conjugate, and we'll be looking at a pattern for how AR verbs work. Alright, as we looked at earlier this year, every verb is either an AR verb, an ER verb, or an IR verb. Today we're just focusing on AR verbs. How do we spot an AR verb? Well, we have AR verbs such as hablar, to speak, escuchar, to listen, estudiar, to study, nadar, to swim, trabajar, to work, enseñar, to teach, bailar, to dance, practicar, to practice. As you notice, we can call these AR verbs because they all end in the letter AR. And all these verbs that we're looking at today are going to work in the same way. So if it's an AR verb, the pattern that we're seeing today is going to apply to any regular AR verb. And since roughly a third of your verbs are AR verbs, we're talking about a pattern that applies across the board to verbs you're going to be using all the time. So let's see what we mean by conjugating an AR verb. First of all, let's take a look at the verb hablar, to speak. What this form of the verb is called is called the infinitive. Hablar itself means to speak. It doesn't mean I speak, it doesn't mean he speaks, it doesn't mean they speak. It just means to speak. Hablar is to speak. This form of the verb is called the infinitive. Bailar is another infinitive. Escuchar is that form of the verb that ends in AR or ER or IR. We cannot use this as the main verb in a sentence, however. Let's take this. Yo, I, hablar means to speak. We cannot say I to speak. That doesn't make any sense. So you cannot just put the verb hablar in a sentence and have it make sense as the main verb. Yo, hablar, I to speak. That doesn't make any sense. So we're going to have to do something to hablar to make it mean I speak. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Alright. In Spanish, one has to conjugate a verb. What that means is you change it so that it agrees with, which means it matches its subject. For regular AR verbs, that means putting the appropriate ending on the verb. We're going to have to change that AR to a different ending. We're going to look at how to do that now. Alright, again, let's look at hablar, to speak. Every verb, every infinitive has two parts. We have the stem and we have the ending. Alright, for the verb hablar, the stem is habl and the ending is ar. For the verb estudiar, your stem would be estudi, and your ending would be ar. For bailar, bail would be your stem, and ar would be your ending. This is very important because in order to conjugate a verb, the first step is you have to take off the ending. So what we're left with was habl, your stem. And what you're going to do is you're going to add the appropriate ending to that stem to make it agree with its subject. So what you have to do is you have to learn the endings for AR verbs. And here they are. If you want to say I do something, you're going to take off the stem and you're going to add the letter O. If you're going to say you do something, tú, you're going to take off that AR and you're going to add as. AS. El means he, ella means she, usted is the formal way of saying you. Notice that all three of those share the same ending, and that ending is a. So your endings are O, as, a. I, you, he, she, or you formal. What we're going to do again is we're going to add those to the stem. We'll see that in just a moment. You want to say we in Spanish. Nosotros or nosotras if the we is all girls. And your ending there is amos. Amos. Ellos means they. So does ellas if you're talking about all females. And ustedes means you all. Again, notice that those three share the same endings. It's on. So your endings are o, as, a, amos, an. You have to memorize these because these apply to all regular AR verbs. So what you're doing, you're going to add these to the stem we just saw. Let's see how that works. Again, you add the appropriate ending to make it agree with its subject. Let's look at those first verbs as singular ones. If you want to say I talk, you take off the AR. Hablo, and you add O. Hablo. Everyone say it, hablo. Hablo means nothing else in Spanish but I talk. Yo hablo, or simply just hablo. You can say either one. You can say hablo, or you can say yo hablo. Either one means I talk, because the O itself will signify that it means I do this. Hablo. The two form is hablas. Hablas. Again, take off your AR, and you add as. Hablas. You talk. Tú hablas. You talk. He talks or she talks. Él habla. Ella habla. He talks, she talks. Now again, if we know if we're talking about a boy or if we're talking about a girl, you can leave off that él or ella. However, it's often good to make sure to put it in there if it's unclear whether you're talking about it, because it could mean either one. Same thing with usted. Habla. Usted habla. You talk. If you want to say, Señor Roberts, you speak Spanish very well. Usted habla español muy bien. So, again, your endings are o, as, a. I, you, he or she. Then we have the plural forms. For we, you take off your AR, and again you add amos. Hablamos, we talk. Hablamos, hablamos. And they talk, which could either be ellos or ellas, hablan. Or if you want to say y'all talk, you all talk, you say ustedes hablan. So again, hablan can either mean they talk or you all talk. So it's often a good idea to put the pronoun, the ellos, the ellas, or the ustedes, if it helps the listener or the reader understand it. So, amos and an are your plural endings. So if we look at the entire conjugation, we say hablo. Repeat. Hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, hablan. O, as, a, amos, an. O, as, a, amos, an. Remember, you take off the AR first and you add these endings. Yo hablo, I speak. Tú hablas, you speak. Él habla, he speaks. Ella habla, she speaks. Usted habla, you speak. Nosotros hablamos, we speak. Ellos hablan, they speak. Ellas hablan, they speak. Ustedes hablan, you all speak. O, as, a, amos, an. Now this works for any regular AR verb. Let's take the verb estudiar. Again, you take the A off of estudiar, and you're left with the studi. That's your stem. If you want to say I study, estudio. Tú estudias. Él, ella, usted, estudia. Nosotros estudiamos. Ellos, ellas, ustedes estudian. O, as, a, amos, an. Remember those. Remember those. Memorize those. O, as, a, amos, an. So how does this work in sentences? Let's take a look at a couple of examples. Notice this first sentence. Yo estudio en la biblioteca, pero Mario y Juana estudian en su casa. I study at the library, but Mario and Juana study at their house. Why do I have estudio for our first verb and estudian for the second verb? Well, that's because your subjects are different for each of these verbs. In the first one, I'm saying I study, so you have to make it estudio. You cannot say yo estudiar. You have to put the right ending. For yo, it's o. Yo estudio. I study at the library. But Mario and Juana, that is a they. That's two people. It's a they. We're going to say they study. So what is our ending for they? It's an. So Mario y Juana estudian en su casa. This is extremely important. You must get the right verb endings to make it match up, to make it agree with your subject. If I were to ask, where do you study? I would say, ¿Dónde estudias? Because I'm asking you. Tú. ¿Dónde estudias? So you see how very important it is to put the right endings on your verb. If you say, yo estudiamos, that makes no sense. If you say, Mario y Juana estudio, that makes no sense. You have to put the right ending on the verb. Therefore, you must memorize these endings. Your endings for AR verbs are o, as, a, amos, an. what you're going to be required to do is you're required to conjugate verbs just like we did with hablar and estudiar. So if you do not know these endings, you won't be able to make good sentences in Spanish at all. That's why this is so extremely important.